Hey everyone, Francis here from What a Hell of a Way to Die. If you've been wondering how you can support myself and Nate here on the show, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/hellofawaytodie. Joining the Patreon at any level gets you access to our Discord server, one bonus episode a month, and early access to interviews. At the $5 level, you'll get more bonus content and an opportunity to vote on monthly Zoo Crew episodes. And at the $10 and up level, you'll get exclusive stickers, patches, and pins sent out to you every quarter. Your support means that we can keep our regular episodes free and make sure we don't have to rely on advertisers. If you can, please consider joining and supporting your two favorite veteran dads.
Glory, glory, what a hell of a way to die. Glory, glory, what a hell of a way to die. Glory, glory, what a hell of a way to die. He ain't gonna jump no more.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of What a Hell of a Way to Die. It's Francis here, back with you, and I have Davis Winkie from Army Times. Davis is a long time, many time on this show, and he loves to bring us the news, and I love to bring him on for the news. This is going to be going out as our news update for the week, because we've got a lot of news to talk about, and one of those things that I would like to discuss with the person who's actually writing it, rather than throwing up a screenshot and making some pithy comments. So, Davis, how are you doing today?
Oh man, I'm doing all right, Francis. Long week, but definitely a rewarding one after the work we did.
Yeah, it's Friday, Friday noonish. It's about that time when you can kind of start like sidling towards the door to get the fuck out. But you and we both work from home, so that's not really going to work out, is it?
Yeah. You know, like I wish I could leave the office sometimes.
I use the excuse to just go walk my dog constantly, and I'm just like, you know what? There's nothing. I fix computers. Like, do you really need me for this next half hour? Probably not. So before we get into it, Davis, I do want to put out that there is going to be content warning for this. We're going to be talking a lot about suicide. We don't normally do content warnings because our content is usually not that upsetting, but I do know that a lot of people have had to deal with suicide. Suicidal ideation. So understand we are going to be talking a lot about that. It is not going to be the whole episode, though. I don't know if you want to jump forward, but just understand that that's our topic for today. So let's dive right into it. So Davis, you worked on a series of stories that started, it seems like a week ago, like last week, we got our first broken track, as you've been calling the series. And we've gotten a few more articles on it since then. And so go ahead and introduce us to this series. Like, what is it? How did you find out? What is it? How did you find out about it? And what is it that got you kind of moving forward with this?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me back on, Francis. I always enjoy it, man. Broken Track is a multi-part investigative series that we published on March 11th and March 12th. That looks at elevated suicide rates in the Army's tank units. This project was born from actually me getting mad at the Army about not being transparent about some stuff back in the summer of 2022 and using the Freedom of Information Act to request a bunch of PDF forms about casualties. You know, the story was fed by a database that I built from the DD Form 1300, which is the military bureaucracy's answer to what information it wants to record after you die. It contains basic demographic info, how you died, where you died, the manner of your death. You know, did you do it on purpose, accident? Did you get sick? Yeah, exactly. And I, over the course of about a year and a half, worked for a while pretty fruitlessly to try to figure out how to get all these PDFs out of PDF form and into a database that we could make sense of. Once I did, however, I was able to do some analysis on Army non-combat deaths between 2019 and 2021. For listeners who may be unfamiliar, the military is performatively transparent when it comes to its suicide problem. It likes to say it's releasing a lot of data, and in some ways it is. They release quarterly reports of who's killing themselves from which branches of the military. They do annual reports with certain demographic breakdowns. But an element that's been missing from this data for almost 15 years is what career field and type of unit these suicide decedents were part of.
Sure, which kind of makes sense because we get the blanket 22 veterans a day suicide rate, but that doesn't really take into account like some of these were, when you get that number, and the idea is to make it this scary thing that some people like me who are combat veterans. You did combat veteran. You're a combat veteran too.
Nah. I'm a COVID veteran, man.
Okay.
Like while you were trying to dodge IEDs, I was just like wearing a mask or whatever it was I did.
My last deployment was 2009. We weren't doing any of that nonsense back then either. But what I mean is, it's the implication is that it's people who have been in for a long period of time, who have suffered either PTSD or other medical problems, maybe getting injured in the military, not being able to make a full recovery, and then kind of degrading from there and ending with suicide, which is not necessarily how it is. And sometimes it's people who I joined the Army. I went halfway through basic training. I stopped in week 4, and then 10 years later commit suicide. That goes into this kind of this statistic that we have here. Which, and again, I don't want anybody to think that we're saying one suicide is as good or bad as any other one, or somebody doesn't count for this. I am wanting to say, though, that this is about the numbers and where these numbers come from and who is being affected, because, as you said, there was never really any indication about, 22 veterans a day. Well, who is it? Is it public affairs people? Is it engineers? Is it the infantry? Those things weren't really done there. So go ahead. You found something, which was really interesting.
Yeah, and there has been some research on connection between military occupation and suicide deaths, but the people who have been doing that research on the academia side have really been disconnected from the reality of how these jobs function and are organized. One example is that somebody grouped together combat engineers, tankers, and artillery for a pooled cohort analysis. I was like, no, these are really fundamentally different things. But a lot of the people who have had access to that data, which has been mostly private, just haven't really understood what to do with it. So the part of the idea here was to not fully democratize the data because it's messy and there's privacy considerations and me not making my whole by name database public, but by having a different set of eyes look at them. And what I found was that between 2019 and 2021, the Army career field that had the highest suicide rate was the 19 kilo MOS, which that corresponds to enlisted soldiers whose job is to ride in tanks. They drive them, they load them, they fire them, they can command them too. Basically, the M1 Abrams tank crew members had a suicide rate that was almost 3 times greater than that of other active duty soldiers. That made me ask, okay, what else is going on here? And I did an analysis by unit type, and I found that members of the service's armored brigade combat teams, which are roughly 4,000 soldier units that are centered around their tanks and their Bradley fighting vehicles, which are things that people might think are tanks that actually carry infantry to the fight. But those units are also inclusive of support personnel like engineers, cooks, mechanics, intel nerds. There's even a public affairs guy or two in there. But armor brigade members, regardless of what their job was, were more than twice as likely to kill themselves during that period compared to the rest of the active duty force. These were pretty alarming findings. in my eyes. And it set me on the course of trying to figure out why.
Yeah, and to give a breakdown of the role of the 19 kilo in the last 20 years in the military, we don't use tanks. We didn't use tanks in Afghanistan or in Iraq. I don't think we use them in Iraq at all. We had them in Afghanistan for a little bit, and they're fairly useless regarding the kind of fight that we had there. So Joe Kasabian over on Lions Led by Donkeys was a tanker, and he talks about how he never did any tanking on his deployments. They were just infantry. You know, every combat arms unit, unless you have something specialized, like if you're EOD or if you're engineer, you're more than likely going to become infantry at some point. My first deployment to Afghanistan, I came across air defense artillery guys playing the role of MPs and infantry, basically. So doing convoy support, things like that. So the suicide rates and you know, butting up against the amount of the role of the soldier in the war doesn't really match up to one another, right? If we have this idea of it's combat stress that causes people to commit suicide, what we have are a lot of soldiers who are, you know, they have very difficult jobs. Being a tanker is not easy, but they're not actually doing it in combat. And another thing I wanted to ask is, how far back does this research go specifically for tankers? Is this since the beginning of Enduring Freedom, we noticed that tankers have a larger rate of suicide, or is it something in the last 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, so that's something where there isn't enough data publicly available to make conclusions over a long period of time. The last time that the military released suicide data broken out by career field was in 2010. They released it for 2001 through 2009. And that data, perhaps influenced by the fact that pretty much everybody who went over to Iraq or Afghanistan was acting as either infantry or, you know, sometimes infantry, depending on what they're doing. The tankers were not that high in that data. But when you get to my database, which is a 3-year window, 2019, 2020, 2021, the pattern was shocking. And part of it comes down to the way that the Army has used tankers has changed radically over the time since the last time this data was public. Instead of using them as great value cannon fodder to be used for whatever you need extra bodies for, after the Obama administration closed some overseas bases in Germany and in Korea, the Pentagon still needed to have tanks in those areas of the world, ostensibly to deter Russia, to deter North Korea, to reassure allies and other friendly countries in the area that the U.S. has skin in the game too, and will come to your aid if it comes to it. So these tankers, instead of like doing Middle East deployments where they might do things outside of their career field, but at least are Army things, they're getting sent on these non-combat deployments to Europe and to Korea. And then also they had one in Kuwait for a while where these guys would, you know, do all this work at home to get ready to deploy. And then they would get over to wherever they were and they would just keep training. They would just keep doing the exact same stuff they were doing it at home. The only difference was they might be getting paid less depending on which deployment they're on. They're probably doing even longer hours because you can't even say like, hey, Sergeant, I need to actually see my wife this week. Like, no, they completely own you when you're on one of these overseas rotations. And a lot of the soldiers with whom I spoke described like a lack of purpose associated with their overseas experiences. And as the need, as dictated by policymakers in the Pentagon for these overseas tank units, increased, the Army's tank brigades had gradually less and less time at home in between the missions. So even when they're having like their 18-month window at home in between these 9-month rotations, more of that time would have to be spent just like in the field away from your family preparing for the next rotation, or in the motor pool fixing your tanks and Bradleys that you broke trying to get ready for the next rotation that you need to fix so you can do the next training event. And then they're going to break again and you got to fix them. You got to train again. It was kind of a vicious cycle that over the past decade has really degraded the quality of life that tankers and, more broadly speaking, members of armored brigade combat teams have experienced. And that ties in with a new vein of suicide prevention research that I learned about for this piece.
So I wonder, do you see some of the factors that are kind of causing this? Like we know op tempo, which I'm sure is a phrase we'll use more often, which means operational tempo, which is, as you said, the constant having to go out into the field and not having any time to be at home, sit on your couch, watch some TV, hang out with your kids, things like that. But also in 2001, the Marines got rid of their tankers, like completely. No Marine tanks anymore. And I don't know how much the Marines were actually a part of these rotations as well, because I understand in the last couple of years, obviously there's been a lot of pressure to put more firepower out onto the borders with Russia because of Russia's aggression in Ukraine and possible aggression anywhere else. So yeah, it's great to have, let's fold a gap this shit again and, point a bunch of tanks and maybe we can dust off a Davy Crockett or two and point them point them into the mountains or something. But we're not at war at the moment. I mean, not in a big war. Obviously, there's always wars going on. There's always, people in Syria. We got people in Jordan. We're still fighting ISIS in a lot of different places. There are lots of combat units out there doing combat stuff, but we obviously don't have the large, the surge years that we had in 2008. We don't have those kinds of numbers. We don't have 500,000 people going into Iraq during the first Gulf War. So what is it about needing to have these guys constantly do this? Do we just need more tankers? Would that be the easiest solution?
Yeah, so there's probably if the goal here is to reduce suicide rates in the armor community, there's probably a few ways to get after that. One of them is that the Army's suicide prevention program currently just doesn't conceive of the idea of systemic suicide risk very coherently. That part of that is because it's a new vein of research, and it's.
Well, what do you mean by systemic suicide?
So this is it's gonna sound obvious when we talk about it, Francis, but I promise that this is a recent turn in mental health research. They're finding that more and more people who die by suicide may not have been fit a traditional risk profile for it. Traditionally, we've conceived of suicide risk as a linear spectrum associated with mental illness. Something where your risk increases as you display more alarming behaviors such as suicidal ideation, making a plan, making an attempt, those kinds of things. That's traditionally been considered linear. But what researchers are finding is that among people who aren't considered mentally ill but have access to lethal means, like a very lethal ways of killing yourself, such as firearm, and are under a lot of stress in their day-to-day life, they are at risk of sudden suicidal behavior if one or two more things goes wrong, perhaps. The idea is that if you have a really stressful and difficult day-to-day life, which, the expert with whom I spoke said high operational tempo, long hours in the motor pool, the things affecting Armored Brigade totally meet this bill. But if a person is experiencing that, they have access to lethal means, and more things start to go wrong in their life, they're at risk of suicide. And whether they survive from that point depends a lot on, their individual resilience, their support system, sometimes just sheer chance, frankly. Because suicide is a really complex phenomena that is difficult for us to get our arms around. But the fact of the matter is that, like, this population within the Army, because of what policymakers in the Pentagon have been asking them to do, are collectively just that much closer to the brink than they would be if they weren't doing mission stuff at warp speed. And the Army struggles to conceive of that. It mainly approaches suicide prevention from two lenses. One is treating it as an individual problem and trying to focus on resiliency, financial preparedness, detecting and treating mental illness. All of these are good things that will address certain risk profiles for suicidal behavior, but don't really get after like the systemic type of risk that the armor brigades face. The other way they have is like community level approaches to it, but that for the Army sees that as being like particular forts, the installation level. In the Army's eyes, community suicide risk is making sure that the commanders of Alaska-based installations have access to resources and money they need to do Alaska-specific suicide prevention approaches, for example. Not, and like that is a way of conceiving of systemic suicide risk. But the problem with the armor brigades is that since it cuts across so many installations, it is a problem that is exacerbated by the Army's own policy decisions, and the Army constantly saying yes when the DoD says, hey, can you give us a tank brigade here, there, everywhere? That would require them to look in the mirror to get after the roots of this increased suicide risk. And other ways to address this would be relooking at things like overseas basing. Poland and Lithuania, for example, are practically begging the United States to permanently base a tank brigade there. I think the joke back during the Trump administration was that Poland was saying that they would build Fort Trump if we would let an armor brigade live there. And the possibility of permanently basing an armor brigade in Korea is also real, though they found another way to kind of make it so that different types of units with strikers are handling that rotation now. But like those are ways that the op tempo could be reduced. But probably the most impactful way that the Army is going to try to address this is by changing the way that tank brigades train up for deployments to give them more time to deliberately program maintenance intervals in between training events that let these units like keep their vehicles up without having to stay past dinner at the unit every day to be ready for the next exercise. Treating people like people rather than appliances by giving them enough time to actually meet their unit's needs is the common sense way out of this. And we'll have a story coming in the weeks ahead where like senior Army officials are taking steps toward this end. But Francis, at this point, man, I'm in I'll believe it when I see it mode.
Absolutely. The Army has never had a very good track record of saying, hey, you seem to be having problems. What can we do to help? And as you said, they kind of view this thing as an individual, right? Like you are having these problems. You are having suicidal ideations. You are having financial problems. You are having mental illness problems. You are having these problems. And at no point in time saying, and we're making it worse. Like you're having financial problems. We could probably pay you more. You're having problems at home. We could probably let you go home more often and spend more time with your family, or just, hang out with the boys. Like if you're, 19, 20, 21, and you're not getting your regularly allotted drinking with the boys on a Saturday night kind of thing, and you don't see a way out of these things. Because trust me, I'm 40 now, so like I understand the slow passage of time and nothing is permanent. But I also understand that at the age of 20, when you get locked into something and you're like, "Fuck, this is going to be it's like this is going to be the rest of my life," and you're not thinking about like, well, eventually I'm going to be 30 and maybe I won't be in the army, or I can get a different MOS, or I can just kind of plow through this and get to the other side of it and do anything else that I want to do. Those things just don't exist. And they're not being kind of told to these guys, like, I know that shit sucks, and I know that is the army. Like, the army will tell you that shit sucks and you need to get over it. And really, the first easiest step would be, the army sucks shit, and I understand that, and I get that, and I hear you, and it's gonna suck because it's the army, but it's not always like this. It doesn't always have to be like this. You can go off and do something else. And the truly crazy people will become tank NCOs, and that's fine. They'll hang out, and you can go do something cool like public affairs instead.
And the part of the problem here, so to speak, is that those conversations are only happening on the initiative of local leaders. The army has not the army has not come down on high to like make sure that the service members in this unit, these types of units, understand that bigger picture. And probably the most disappointing thing over the course of reporting this investigation, other than just the sheer tragedy of it all, especially recounting the stories of the Iron Knight Battalion, man. But like one of the most disappointing things aside from that was, as the army was trying to respond to me and working really hard to make sure that I accurately understood what programs and initiatives they had, what else might be in the works, like they deserve their credit where it is due. But what nobody did at any level in the army over the course of working with me for this story was just acknowledge the pain and impact of this phenomena for the service members. That was really disappointing for me, because I've been behind closed doors with some of these people. I know that a lot of leaders are good people actually trying to do what they can to make life less shitty. It's the fact that they're locked into systemic requirements and demands, and there often is little incentive to be the one who steps up and tries to break a harmful paradigm.
And I'm going to say, you mentioned the Iron Knights, and you have another article that says why the Iron Knights chose to speak out about the suicides. So what is the Iron Knights? You release you get your data out. Did the Iron Knights come to you, or was this something you went to them before this was published and asked them like, hey, what's going on? Do you guys want to talk to me about this? How did this kind of come about in tandem with the research you were doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll pause here for a moment and give a shout out to my editor, who I throw this man under the bus frequently. His name is James Clark. James is a great guy.
I know James. He's a good guy. Yeah. Look, we all hate and love our editors. It's fine. And our editors know that.
He put his virtual finger in my face and said, Davis, so help me God, I know this is a numbers story that you've been doing nerd shit on for more than a year. If you don't have like soldiers, real people in this story, I'm going to fight you. And he was, in retrospect, he was really right about that. Like this story only had the impact it did because I took his guidance and I looked through my data, and I was able to find certain units in the Army that during that 3-year period had experienced what's called suicide clusters. Public health experts define that as a series of suicides that occur in either close, like geographic or organizational or like even temporal proximity. And what I found was like there were some battalion level units, so like groups of like 400 to 600 people that had experienced like 4, 5, even 6 suicides during relatively short periods of time. And I set out to just find people from this one particular unit, 1st Battalion, 66th Armor Regiment, the Iron Knight Battalion. They're based out of Fort Carson, Colorado. And they, between April of 2020 and June of 2021, had 6 soldiers kill themselves. Several of those came in a very short span in the early winter of 2020, those late days of fall, first days of winter. And I made some social media call outs. I worked some source networks that I already had. And ultimately, I ended up talking with more than 60 current and former members of armor brigades. Probably about 20 or so of those guys were Iron Knights from that time period. 8 of those guys chose to speak under their names in my story. And what we were able to produce as a result was basically a narrative retelling of that series of deaths, the context in which they occurred, the impact that the deaths had. Who were these people who were dying? We were able to reconstruct that and really illustrate the human cost of this phenomena. Like numbers on a spreadsheet are people at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think suicide is one of those things that most veterans, most people in the military, like a large amount, have been affected by it one way or another. I was at a funeral 4 months ago for a guy that was in my unit who committed suicide, 10 years later. It's not an easy thing, and it's, the suicide, like you said, it isn't just a number on the paper, because that affects everybody that was in that person's purview. And as you talk about suicide clusters, I know also one thing is that when somebody commits suicide, other people think, hey, that guy did it, maybe I can too. Like, it kind of opens up this world, or it opens up this idea of, this guy ended his pain and I can understand that and I can do the same thing myself. It just kind of gives people that idea. So the effect isn't just, 1, 2, or 3 people who die. It's going to be in the next, 5 to 10 years, how many more are going to, it's how, like I said, my friend Ben, who committed suicide, he was out of the Army for 10 years before he did. And he had been struggling with a lot of things, I'm not going to get into it about Ben, but it's something that happens and affects so many people that get touched by that person. And that is going to, if we want to look at this from an operational tempo, if we want to look at this from, effect on a soldier, that makes you not really combat ready. That makes you a person who now might need, for me, the person who had the friend die, I might need behavioral health. I might need my own mental health therapy sessions, things like that are going to take me out of this. And again, I'm not, trying to make it about me, about the person who dies, but these are the effects that a suicide has. This is the overall effect, and how it can bring down everything else. With just like 5 people commit suicide within a 6-month period, that is not just, well, that's 5 people out of, the 5,000 we have. A good chunk of those 5,000 knew that those 5 people. And that is where a real danger lurks in something like this, I feel.
Exactly. And some of the people we talked to have lived those effects. There's this one medic with whom I spoke, a sergeant by the name of Colin Patton. He is still in that unit today, believe it or not, but he is pending a medical retirement for PTSD that emerged from that period. Colin trusted me to tell his story and to tell that of his friends. And I'm deeply indebted to him for that. And he did so in the face of like serious risk of reprisal, as did the other 7 Iron Knights who spoke under their names. But Colin Patton is a guy who loves his soldiers. He loves the guys next to him. He wants to help them. He wants to help them find their way in life. He wants to make sure that they're getting the care and treatment that they need. And the Army is going to be losing this man as a result of what happened. And he's not the only one who was impacted in a similar way by that experience. And the reason why it was so important in a story like this was it's easy for somebody to read a story that just has numbers in it and maybe an expert or two and dissociate it away. To like be like, oh wow, well that sucks, and to move on from it. But in my case, like, I wrote this story because I wanted Army senior leaders, I wanted DoD senior leaders, I wanted members of Congress to read this story and understand the full spectrum of the problem, one of its causes, and the real impact, so that they would know exactly what the cost is of business as usual. And that's really what the story of the Iron Knights allowed us to do here. And I think it's played a really big role in inspiring some of the response we've seen from lawmakers and others.
Yeah, there is, from March 15th, lawmakers push Pentagon for overdue data on tanker suicide rates. Because, again, it feels like as you said, the Army likes to be transparent-ish about things like this. And, like, here's the good things that we're doing, and here's how we're preventing these things. But, like, as soon as they start fucking up, rather than say, oh, we're fucking up over here, we need to fix it, it kind of gets swept underneath the rug. So it sounds like your stories and the work that you put into this is actually making Congress say, hey, you guys need to deal with this because it's not acceptable.
Yes, that is some of what's going on here. And part of it is not just the Army. Like the Army has made decisions from a policy and programmatic level that have contributed to this problem. However, the Defense Department, through the combatant commands, those are the ones asking for these Army units to constantly come overseas. Mm-hmm. The Army's saying yes, but they're not the one asking for themselves.
Right. The Army doesn't get to say no. And
the Pentagon isn't doing these things just on its lonesome. They're doing it because of U.S. policy. And U.S. policy comes back to those of us who participate in our democracy and vote and engage with our lawmakers. This is a problem that we all have a part in, so to speak. And the political realities that lead to some of these decisions mean that our lawmakers need to look in the mirror as well. Obviously nobody likes to raise their hand and say, my bad, ever. But I think that the Army also isn't incentivized to do so. And we'll see what changes. Like I'm expecting that we're going to see maybe another, like a provision in the defense policy bill inspired by this that might clamp down more on suicide data and might demand some changes to prevention measures, or like at least a study or an assessment on it. I wouldn't be surprised if in the weeks ahead we see Congress press the commander of European Command, General Chris Cavoli, during an upcoming posture hearing about whether he wants a permanently stationed tank brigade and whether that's feasible. Because one of the more influential members of the House Armed Services Committee told me that the Army needs to start considering that as an option again. But ultimately, it would also involve the combatant command as well. Like, overseas basing would take a lot from everybody, frankly.
Yeah. And I know that the military is having problems with retention and recruiting as is. So it's hard to say like, well, what the easy answer is we need 10,000 more tankers, but we can't just go out and press gang those guys and be like, look, you guys are tankers now. It's cool. You're going to get to stay at home more often, but also get into the tank. Get in the robot, Shinji. And we're not going to, so you have either, we need to have permanent parties kind of stationed out there, a permanent base, a permanent brigade that you just have people kind of rotate in and out of. But at the same time, now you have to do, like you said, all of the training here in the United States to go do the training out there as well. And without more bodies or without a drop in the operational tempo, there's no change to this. Like these are the two easiest ways to affect this problem. Like there's not going to be a 1-hour seminar given by a board staff sergeant that's going to help this. There's not going to be a one weekend thing with a psychiatrist that we can figure all this out and everybody learns how to hunt the good stuff and find resiliency. That's not going to fix this. This is something that is because of our operational tempo based on not even being at war, like not even currently being at war, but based on the possibility of war. And we're driving our people to this brink of madness based on, well, what happens if Russia decides to get froggy? Like, I don't really know if a tired tank unit is really going to be the catalyst that's going to change the war or anything like that, but it seems that other people do, or that we need to constantly have this posture that says, look how tough we are, but at the same time, we're doing to our soldiers what so many militaries have always done, if you look into any kind of military history, and that's grind them down to a nub and say, we can get more where you came from.
Yes, I will interject with one thing for sure about, like if Russia does get froggy, I think the tankers would be way more excited about Europe deployments. Those guys so desperately want to feel the wind on their face in an open hatch on the Eastern European steppe, squaring off with a T-55 because Russia, all their other tanks got blown up by the Ukrainians through our little proxy war. I feel like those, that kind of goes back to it though, Francis, because the Army has seen operational tempo like this before. Units were going back and forth between the U.S. and Iraq and Afghanistan at an even faster rate during the first half of the War on Terror. But there's a difference in that. There's major differences with that. When you went to the sandbox, man, how much more money were you making? The tax-free money, your bonuses, hostile fire pay, drop a piano on your head pay. I don't even remember what all the pays and allowances are for that. And, it's one thing to go to your family, go to your spouse and say, hey, honey, I've got to go to war. That's always been part of this deal. Service members get a lot in America and get a lot of deference in American society because they have volunteered to bear that burden of going to war if necessary. It's part of the job. I could get sent to war next week on pretty short notice as a part-time Air Force personnel guy.
Hopefully we get to feel the wind of an open hatch of a C-130 as you fly over the European steppe.
Oh, goodness, man. But I get a lot of benefits. My son will get to go to college for almost free someday because I have made that trade-off. Compare that, however, to bearing similar time burdens and similarly low quality life at home to go sit and be cold in a field in Poland.
Right. This all gets solved with just a real quick hot war with Russia. Just let the tankers do all the shit that they've finally been training to do. Let them, like you said, pop the top off of a T-55 or T-62 or 3. War is not great, and Russia sucks, and war is terrible, and nobody should do it. But at the same time, I'm sure that as a tanker in an M1 Abrams, the top of the line U.S. tank, best tank in the world, fuck off with your Leopards. Fuck off with your T-14s. The Abrams is the best main battle tank in the world, and to watch like your Ukrainian counterparts get to tear into these guys and get to go do some war shit while you have to sit in Poland twiddling your thumbs, probably not helping. And I'm not saying
these guys don't like it.
Yeah, I'm not saying we hit the big Article 5 button for NATO here, but I'm just saying that if you're like this is a big part of it is getting stir crazy. We see this problem a lot on the Texas border with the National Guard troops too, who get sent down there. They don't have a clear mission. They don't really know what they're doing down there, and a lot of them come to the conclusion that it's all bullshit and there's no reason to be doing this, and it's a big waste of time. And you're probably going to have that same feeling because the best you're going to get is you're going to get a crusty first sergeant who's going to walk up and down the tank line saying, boys, those Russians might do something, but they're not. They're not going to, but they might. So we need to be here, and you need to keep staring off into that field for the next 6 to 12 months and go home and then do the whole thing again 9 months later. So it's hard to be trained to do something like this and then never get to do it, and not only never get to do it, but get to watch other people do it. With go have a dance with Russia. I'm not saying do it, but I'm saying it would help.
Yeah, and I can certainly forgive the 19 kilos out there who would want that to happen, because they're, for like the past decade, bearing the burdens of like their lives have been disrupted in a manner similar to they would be if they were getting to go actually do their jobs, and they're not. So that plays into this as well. So I think that ultimately, in the wake of this story, the Army is talking about making some common sense changes to its force generation model for training and deploying armor units. That's probably going to alleviate this some. I think over time, the requirements are, barring unforeseen stuff, are getting a little bit better for these tankers compared to how many brigades there are. But I think that now that policymakers and military leaders are aware of what the consequences of running these units ragged should be, they need to figure out what safeguards can be put in place to ensure it doesn't play out like this again.
Right. And as you said, that's not an overnight thing. There's got to be studies. There's got to be a lot of people have to get their hands involved. Because I will say one thing: the government doesn't do anything half-assed when it comes to this. There will, if they are going to do it correctly, they will do the due diligence. But like you said, we'll see if they actually do it correctly, or if this becomes a sweep under the rug and let's move on kind of thing. We're just not going to let you see those numbers anymore. We see what showing you those numbers did for us, and we're not going to do that anymore.
Well, yeah. We'll see, man. But one thing is for sure is that my colleagues and I, we're going to be keeping a really close eye on whatever Congress does about this, whatever the Pentagon does about this. We're going to make sure everybody stays abreast of it.
Well, that's good. And when we've got more, we'll bring you back on to talk about it.
Hell yeah, man.
All right, Davis, one other thing that I wanted to talk about. I didn't get a chance to talk about this on one of my recent shows. I'm not going to have a chance to talk about it this week. So the Air Force, you guys, you motherfuckers. I've talked a lot about the Air Force recently, because it happens. Sometimes we beat up on the Marines all the time, so we got to beat up on the Air Force as well. So the same day that we had the guy who was releasing classified data into his Discord to impress a bunch of racists, he got sentenced to 16 years. But on the same day, we have a lieutenant colonel who gets caught leaking secrets to a honeypot spy in supposedly Ukraine, but very much probably Russia. So first question is, what's wrong with the Air Force here? What do you got? I've been a lonely man before, 100%. I have been sad and depressed and alone. I have never, I don't think that I would fall for a honeypot this obvious, though.
Francis, the answer here is going to be very on brand. This gentleman who leaked those secrets to the obvious honeypot, yes, he was an Air Force civilian employee, but he was a retired Army lieutenant colonel.
Damn it. It comes back around to me. That's fine. We know. Look, we in the Army know we're fucked up, so it's okay. So let's see. So this guy, David Franklin, released, officer may have leaked secrets to a honeypot spy. And the reason why this has been such a big blow up is because of the indictment that we got with co-conspirators 1 request for information comes from with some of the greatest one-liners I've ever heard. So in this indictment, on or about March 7th, American intelligence says that already 100% of Russian troops are located in the territory of Ukraine. Do you think this information can be trusted? So that's something that's coming from the honeypot. Then on the 11th, dear, what is shown on the screens in the special room? Is it very interesting? Special room, I assume being the skiff, but it could be the sex dungeon that they're all working in. On the 15th, quote, by the way, you were the first to tell me that NATO members are traveling by train, and only now, already evening, this was announced on the news. You are my secret informant love. How were your meetings? Successfully? This is all like, I have gotten these texts from like Chinese scammers that are very easy to I think what we really need suicide training, but we also need training on like how to not fall for very obvious honeypots like this. And then
you would think that people in the intel community would get this kind of training, but I've been too busy, counting people and making sure that they get their awards 6 months late for the past several years to know how they actually do this.
And my civilian job regularly has phishing email tests that go out. So this is the operational security is everybody's job, obviously, right? So this is a big failure. So here's my favorite. On or about March 18th. Beloved Dave, do NATO and Biden have a secret plan to help us? This is, again, supposedly somebody from Ukraine. NATO and Biden. I know that there's a lot of information in the skiff. I don't think that there's anything like that. March 23rd, Dave, it's great that you get your information about specified country number 1 first. I hope you will tell me right away. You are my secret agent with love.
It had to have been a bit, right? like I'm trying to assume good faith here. Let me red team this.
Right.
Maybe this guy's not a complete idiot. Maybe he's not. Maybe he and this gal have like this rip-roaring relationship where like this is a recurring bit. Whenever she asks them how work is going, the secret agent jokes, it's a real good way to like butter up the ego of an intel type, I'm sure.
And I'm sure like every intel guy probably has some kind of like James Bond fantasy. So every one of them wants to like bang the Nikita Revolutionary or whatever, the Russian spy with the high heels and the red hair who's just, come to me, my beloved Dave. Tell me about NATO and Biden. And maybe I like to think, well, obviously this guy's being indicted. So, but I'm sure that there's plenty of guys out there who probably may have this kind of set up with their honeys. It's like, hey, babe, I'm going to be deployed for a little bit. So I'm going to be gone for about 2 to 3 months. Can you be my little Russian spy while I'm gone? I can send you I can send you secret pictures from the secret room, and it's just like a dick pic in the skiff. Which also is terrible. You shouldn't be taking your camera into the skiff. Do your dick pics in the porta-john like the rest of us.
Yeah, the rest of us poors.
Yeah. Sweet Dave, the supply of weapons is completely classified, which is great. April 14th, my sweet Dave, thanks for the valuable information. It's great that 2 officials from the USA are going to Kyiv.
What I can't wrap my head around is like the way that these are worded like a readout from a phone call. I think that at some point I would get suspicious if my secret agent honey was like putting in writing everything I said over the phone.
Dave's horny, man. He doesn't give a shit. He get, and 20 years ago, you just call a phone sex line and you'll be fine. But now you gotta find Russian honeypots to get off.
I guess.
All right, April 19th, Dave, I hope tomorrow NATO will prepare a very unpleasant, quote, surprise, end quote, for Putin. Will you tell me? Will you give me all the secrets, sweet Dave? 21st, you have a job in the operations center today. I remember. I'm sure there's lots of interesting news there, question mark. And in response to these requests, Dave Franklin Slater indeed provided classified NDI to co-conspirator 1. For example, on the 28th of March, David transmitted classified NDI regarding military targets in Russian war against Ukraine, and transmitted classified NDI regarding Russian military capabilities relating to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So giving away some really disclosing stuff that you shouldn't be telling. And look, there's probably like, did this destroy the war effort? No, but like also you can't be doing this. You can't tell your Russian honeypot this kind of shit. You gotta, or at least you gotta meet up and get a little physical first. Have her take you out to dinner before you start dropping your pants and giving all the classified information about surprises for Putin, I suppose.
Well, I hear you could do that with your biographer and still be welcome in the 4-star general club.
That fucking guy. The thing that kills me about that, my favorite part of the whole, that was Petraeus, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the whole Petraeus story is that the way that they sent messages to each other was to create draft emails in a shared Google account and then delete the drafts afterwards. And that... Look, I get it. If I was old as shit, I too would think that would work. But I know better. I know anything that I type into the Google machine is there forever. And we need our generals to understand that more. We need computer or network just an understanding core, like a course to be like, look, it's not just a series of tubes, and everything you write on the internet, even if you write a tweet and delete it, it's still there. Somebody can still fucking find it. And you can't do that. If you're going to do it, write it on a piece of paper, hand it to the person directly, and then burn it afterwards. Is the only thing that's safe. Do not Google search this stuff. Do not email one another. It's all got a paper trail.
Yeah, do you think I should Google how to get away with murder before I murder somebody, Francis?
Only if you do it in incognito mode.
That'll save me. You're
That's the
right.
trick. Because then you hit Control-Shift-N, then you get the magical Google portal that doesn't save anything, right? Davis, I appreciate you coming on. Tell people where they can find you.
You can find me on whatever your social media poison of choice is, except TikTok. Not public there, I don't think. Most of my stories are at armytimes.com, and you can probably find me again on this podcast sometime soon.
Absolutely. All the links to Davis's stories are going to be below in the show notes. I highly encourage you to go and find those and read those and kind of get a deeper personal look at kind of the things that we've been talking about. So, Davis, thank you so much for coming on. Everybody else, thank you for being here, and we'll talk to you next week.